I'd like to extend a very warm welcome to Julian Vaughan, who has come to talk to us about corporate gaslighting. Julian was raised in the northeast of England and was a teenager in the time of the 1984-85 miners' strike. So very, very good that we've got you at this time of year. He has been a train driver for 20 years and a union rep for the last 15 years, and also campaigns for an accessible rail network. He stood as a Labour candidate in Bedfordshire in the 2017 and 2019 elections. Welcome, Julian. Over to you.
Thank you very much. And hopefully I won't get mud. I've done quite a lot of public speaking, but I can never quite get over the nerves. And I remember being at a hustings in the 2017 general election, and I called homes fit for human habitation, homes fit for human consumption. And I wondered why all the audience, there's about 100 people there, why they were laughing. And then someone kindly explained it to me. So if I get my words mixed up, it won't be the first time. So no, thanks very much for that introduction. So I haven't got all the answers. I've got some ideas about what I'm going to talk about, but I'd love to get some ideas and answers from you as well. But of course, I'll be open to any questions at the end if you have any. So what I want to do today, and I'll be as brief as possible, but it should be about 15-20 minutes, is to talk about the common threads and the causes of the various scandals and disasters, you know, running from Hillsborough to Grenfell to Windrush to the most recent post office scandal, Horizon scandal, that you'll know about. And we've titled it corporate gaslighting, but actually it's far worse than that. It's actual state gaslighting. It's just oppressive nature of the state and how it treats ordinary working people. So I'm going to go through the various aspects of that. So starting off with Hillsborough. So what actually links a football match in Hillsborough in Sheffield in 1989 to the Windrush scandal, to a fire in a block of flats in West London, and now to the recent Horizon scandal, although actually it's been going on for a number of years? At first glance, they probably couldn't seem less related if you tried to put them together. But I hope to set out how they are related. And as a group of scandals and disasters, for want of a better word, they're a symptom of the profound imbalance of power between the state and the people. And as I've said, I've got ideas about why this is happening. And I hope you'll agree that there are common threads, but I certainly don't have the answers, and I look forward to talking about that at the end. But I want to say at the very start, at the heart, and this is easily forgotten, but at the heart of all these tragedies are the victims. And it's not just the 97 that died at Hillsborough and died in the other disasters and have been treated so badly by the government, but it's the ripple effect that goes through all these communities, the communities of Liverpool and wherever these disasters happened. And sometimes I think when we talk about politics, we talk about ideas and concepts and ideologies. And sometimes we actually forget the reality of the impact of politics on people's lives. So I want to set that out very early. So what was Hillsborough? It was a tragedy, but it was no accident. It wasn't an unforeseen event. There were clues to what was going to happen at Hillsborough. There were many warning signs, both at Hillsborough in previous years and at other football matches. Anyone who went to a football match in the 1980s, and I'm glad I did then, and I still go to football now, as we were talking about earlier, will recognise the casual, at best, I'd say the casual indifference to the fans at that time, but at worst, open hostility and contempt. Now, this othering that was present at that time created almost the, I believe, the dehumanization of football fans as a collective. And this dehumanization is repeated in the other disasters that I'm going to talk about shortly. How else can we explain the inaction of the police walking along the bottom of the Leppings Lane terrace, looking into those pens at Hillsborough where people were dying and taking no action whatsoever? Now, the police were not only incompetent, but this culture resulted, obviously, in the tragedy of Hillsborough and the safety of the fans being disregarded. But the common thread between Hillsborough and issues like the Windrush scandal and Grenfell and the post office scandal is what these victims suffered, the actual disaster on the day or what happened to their jobs, etc. But they also suffered and continue to suffer to this day a double injustice, because they were blamed, the Hillsborough, in case of the Hillsborough fans, they were blamed for their own deaths, and their friends on the terraces were blamed for the deaths of their friends. This is the first example of gaslighting by the state. It's definitely not the last. Now, there's never one issue that causes a disaster. And in the case of Hillsborough, there were multiple issues. The first was the lie. Now, I don't read The Sun. I've never read The Sun for many, many years, but I'm sure you'll be familiar with the lies that were peddled in The Sun and the lies that were peddled by Duckenfield, who was the police officer in charge of safety of the match. Now, those lies spread around the world, and I still speak to people today that believe the Sun's version of events and Duckenfield's version of events. And it shames me to say that politicians of both sides believed them as well. And I'll give some examples in a moment. Just going into Hillsborough, and this is when I've written a number of blogs on Horizon and Hillsborough. But going through the evidence, how alcohol readings could be taken from the dead. This includes children as young as 14, to attempt to blame the fans because to believing they were drunk and that they caused the crush. And some of you may remember Bernard Ingham, Thatcher's press secretary, who years after the disaster talked about a tanked up mob breaking down the gates. It was lies, but many people believed it. Then we had the cover-up, and the cover-up runs through all these scandals. The changing of the police statements to remove any criticisms of the actions of the police, and the closing of ranks, and the prioritization of reputational protection that we see today in the Horizon post office scandal. It's still ongoing, and the post office scandal is getting worse by the day. The only thing, the only positive from this is that normally issues like this stay in the news cycle for a few days, but I'm pleased to say that it's staying in the news cycle for weeks and weeks now. So I do think we'll eventually get compensation. Oh, that's a struggle at the moment. And I'm hoping that we will actually get justice. though justice is very difficult, true justice is very difficult to achieve. But going on, and this applies again to many of the scandals, the lack of political support. Politicians passively accepting what they are told by agents of the state, as if it's true without any questioning. And this happened in Hillsborough, and it also happened with the post office scandal. Some of you may remember Ed Davey, who defended himself because he said, I accepted what the post office executives told me. A politician should not accept at face value exactly what he's told. It's unacceptable. Back in October 2011, so we're talking 22 years after Hillsborough, David Cameron was widely reported to have said in relation to the Hillsborough family's quest for justice, it was like a blind man in a dark room looking for a black cat that isn't there. Now, this is when I'm talking about state gaslighting. How must the families have felt when going through all those years of pain from losing their family members, to have the Prime Minister of the UK basically saying, I don't believe you, you're talking rubbish. I can't imagine how that would feel, but it must be pretty grim. And then we move on to, sorry, I'm going to have to quote Cameron and now Boris Johnson. I know it's terrible. Boris Johnson in a 2004 Spectator article about Hillsborough. But that is no excuse for Liverpool's failure to acknowledge, even to this day, the part played in the disaster by drunken fans at the back of the crowd who mindlessly tried to fight their way into the ground that Saturday afternoon. The police became a convenient scapegoat, and the Sun newspaper a whipping boy for daring, albeit in a tasteless fashion, to hint at the wider causes of the incident. So we go back to this lie, and the lies that are said at the start of these issues just become repeated and just become accepted fact. And then we have the police, the lack of police accountability, how they can take early retirement, changing the statements, the ongoing lies. And we have the cozy relationship between the police and the print media, which has been a factor in many of the scandals over the last few years. And we talk about the Daniel Morgan murder and others. There's too many to talk about this evening. Unforgivably, the defense of their actions and their attempt to blame the fans continued all the way up to the second inquest, which found the Liverpool fans were unlawfully killed. Their approach, and I'm definitely not anti-police, I've got friends who are in the police force, but their actual the way they act as a collective is dreadful. I'm trying to think of a better word for it. Apologise. Now, the tragedy of Hillsborough was born out of Orgreave, which many of, I'm sure most of you know, well, as an incident that happened during the miners' strike, and I believe emboldened the South Yorkshire police to act with the impunity that they did at Hillsborough. And Hillsborough remains an open wound and an example of the failure of our legal and political system. Now, it took 27 years for the families of Hillsborough to achieve some sort of justice. Their families, their victims were exonerated. They never actually received proper justice. The greatest fine given out was £6,500 to the safety director of the club. No one else, the police, no one else in charge was found guilty of any crime. How long will we wait for justice for Grenfell It's 6 years so far, so coming up to 7 years, or the Post Office Horizon victims. They'll get their compensation, I'm fairly confident of that, but will they actually get justice? Or will it just be passed around and no one be found to blame? Moving on to Windrush. Now, we can't escape the fact that many of the injustices I talk about today have been inflicted either on people of colour or on the working class. Now, in the case of Windrush, in the case of Grenfell, 85% of the victims were from minority groups. And the Windrush scandal, which relates to individuals who migrated to the UK from the Commonwealth between 1948 and 1973, is yet another example of the othering, this dehumanization of a section of our society, where their lives were deemed to be worth less than anyone else's. And the Wendy Williams review that took place after the scandal broke concluded that the Home Office had shown ignorance and thoughtlessness, and what had happened, much like Hillsborough, was foreseeable and avoidable. Now, there are many similarities with the Post Office scandal. The delays to the compensation, which is still ongoing in the case of the Windrush scandal, and the Home Office dealing with the aftermath of their policies. It's the same with the Post Office now. Both are marking their own homework. Further, the oh, is that a dog coming in? Further, the slowness of access to justice has resulted in many victims dying before receiving redress. At best, it's a casual indifference. At worst, let's call it for what it is. It's institutional racism. So what we end up with is people most in need of protection from the state. Those people that don't have the same protections or access to the law that are available to the rest of us are the ones that are denied that protection. As Andy Burnham put it, from Peterloo 200 years ago to Grenfell today, ordinary bereaved families continue to be treated in a cruel and dismissive way by a justice system which favours the powerful and connected. It's a pattern that keeps on repeating itself, and it's time to break it. And I don't think any of us would argue with that. Moving on to Grenfell, like Hillsborough, Grenfell was no accident. It was foretold in previous fires, such as the Lackenhall fire in Southwark in 2009, the Harrow Court fire in Stevenage in 2005, and the Knowsley Heights fire in Liverpool in 1991, and others. However, these fires happened while health and safety regulations were being seen, and I'm ashamed to say, by all political parties as a burden to business. And at the same time as this, we had a drive to cutting red tape and a 1 in, 2 out principle of safety regulation. And yet again, we see the shameful behaviour of big business that puts people before profits, at the same time as having guilty knowledge of the dangers of their products. And anyone who's watched the Grenfell inquiry, the evidence is harrowing, but it's also extremely angering to watch. Just the attitude of these people from the cladding companies and who helped refurbish the tower. We had a drive to save money through value engineering, using cheaper products. Fair enough, we want to make savings, but then these companies pocketing these profits for themselves, not sharing it out with everyone. And we've seen through years of austerity, the hollowing out of local authorities and their power and their powers in enforcing health and safety regulations. And what we see with Grenfell, what we also saw, was the imbalance of power, where corporate witnesses were granted immunity from any oral evidence they gave during the inquiry, while the residents of the tower were threatened with deportation. So who are the bad actors that link these events? So we have a corporate culture where we have a rampant pursuit of profit above all else, aided and abetted by a light touch government that removes any of these burdens to business and fails to provide sufficient resources to monitor and regulate. As I've said previously, what gilded lives the corporate elite have in the UK, serenely gliding from boardroom to boardroom, picking up a gong and a few non-executive directorships, lacking any fear of personal accountability from a legal system stacked in their favour. The attitude of the post office towards the sub-postmasters was corporate gaslighting on an industrial scale, shifting blame onto the submasters with the guilty knowledge that their IT system was defective. And I think we've got to, I mean, it's ongoing, the inquiry, but I think we're pretty sure that this knowledge, this guilty knowledge, goes higher and higher and higher as we learn more and more. But we have a parliament where the lack of working class MPs means there's a lack of experience of the lives of ordinary working people at the heart of our government. And I always say, I'm slightly biased, but I always say we need more MPs who wear a high vis for their jobs, not just for a photo opportunity. And if we continue to draw our MPs from such a narrow pool of talent from the business world, is it any wonder that they create laws that favour big business over the lives of ordinary working people, or even those that don't work? Because one thing that gets me slightly annoyed is we're always talking about working people as if people who don't work are valueless. And I do think we need to change that. And we have a parliament where many seem to see their role as a sideline rather than as a primary job, and where hospitality from various corporations enables a pretty cushy life, far from the reality the rest of us experience. And moving on to the media, we have a media with a broadcast media overwhelmingly drawn from the middle classes, and a BBC who I'm very proud of. I think it's one of our greatest institutions. I'm certainly not one for knocking the BBC, but I feel it's lost its way with the ongoing political threats about how it will be funded. And we have a hard right media that politicians fear rather than respect, and a media that claims to represent the people at the same time as promoting hate and division and throwing up false enemies. And on a system, what happens to those people in power, the perpetrators of these many injustices? As I said before, they get a gong. They get a job in the cabinet office, which Paula Venables did after she left the post office. We have Sir Norman Bettison, who played a significant role in the aftermath of the Hillsborough disaster. Paula Venables with a CBE. Imagine what impression this has on the victims. It will feel like the full state of the law is against you. We have collusion. Moving on to another scandal very briefly, we have significant evidence of collusion between the police and the state in the case of the Shrewsbury 24 pickets and the pickets at Orgreave. Both of these sets of pickets were charged with unlawful assembly and some with riot, very serious offences. And there's also been evidence of police collusion in the blacklisting scandal and between the print media and the police. Look up the Daniel Morgan murder for more evidence of that. And I won't talk about them this evening, but there's other injustices, the contaminated blood scandal, the nuclear test veterans, Aberfan. So that's that. What can be done? Let's try and be positive after all this bad news I've given you. I believe, and I'd look forward to hearing from other people, we need a genuine Hillsborough law that imposes a duty of candour on all public officials. What came out from the government recently was not that in any way whatsoever. And we need to provide a level playing field in terms of equal access to the law. What happened with the post office scandal was that the post office legal team tried to extend the length of the legal process. So hoping and knowing that the post office submasters would run out of money. That's absolutely disgraceful. And the original the families of the 97 victims at Hillsborough, didn't have the same access to the law, whereas the police and the ambulance service had unlimited funds. That's just basically unjust. And we need to have some form of Leveson 2 inquiry to investigate the relationship between the press and the police. We were promised it, and as you know, the Conservative government abandoned it. I can't think why, but they abandoned it a number of years ago. And when we promote business, which we shouldn't be anti-business, we should be pro-business, and there are many good companies out there. But I'd just like to say, yes, let's be pro-business, but let's be pro-ethical business. They must have more of a responsibility than just to their shareholders. Or if they don't, why are we giving them millions and millions of pounds of public money? Does anyone actually believe that the regulators such as Ofgem and Ofwat have the public's principles or interests at heart? And I've dealt with Ofgem quite a bit in relation to the energy pricing, and that's about us. That's their mission statement. Our job is to look after the interests of the public. Now, there's no way, I think anyone on a prepayment meter will agree that they're keeping to their statement. But also we can be a relentless ally to the victims. Now, before I spoke this evening, I've been messaging Lee Castleton, who's one of the post office victims who you may have heard about. And he's asked me to ask you to contact your MP and ask for these compensation schemes to be taken out of the hands of the government and the hands of the post office and be led by an independent body. So I'll definitely be writing to my MP again. I write to him quite a lot about that. And I believe at the moment it seems to be going the other way in our what is becoming a very polarised society. But we must take every attempt to promote empathy and compassion back into our politics, not join in with a race to the bottom. And when we have tough choices to make, and we will have tough choices to make, can we make sure that these tough choices don't further impact the most vulnerable in our society? And sometimes that will mean we need to work with people who we profoundly disagree with on many issues. And as I said before, as politicians and activists, it can be very easy to get hung up on process and political concepts. And I speak as an ex-CLP chair, where we've talked about motions all night, and actually at the end of it, have we actually achieved anything? Not really. We might feel better about ourselves, but we must embed ourselves in our communities to understand our communities. But can we really change anything? Our current problems can be overwhelming. Austerity, 14 years and counting of austerity, the war in Ukraine, climate change, and the very real threat of a world war. I'm going to leave you with a message of hope about what you can do as an individual. In 2009, at the 20th anniversary of the memorial service at Anfield, Andy Burnham was speaking to the crowd. And I hope that Andy Burnham, I've put this in a blog already, I hope he wouldn't be offended. I have the greatest respect for him. But I hope you wouldn't mind saying, if while his speech was heartfelt, it sounded very much like the rhetoric of many other politicians, rather than the compassionate Liverpudlian that I know he is. And Andy's pledge that 96 football supporters who died will never be forgotten was met by one lone voice from the crowd. We want justice. That was one voice. And anyone who listened to that will remember it ended up the whole crowd breaking into a very long chant of justice for the 96. At the time, I know it's 97 now. This had a clear impact on Andy Burnham. And he carried on his speech with great composure. But this one voice in the crowd set off a chain of events that led to the formation of the Hillsborough Independent Panel, which revealed a lot more about the disaster. And subsequently to that, it led to the second inquest, which found that the 97 victims were unlawfully killed. One lone voice did this. Your lone voice can make a difference too. So please stay angry, please join the dots, and please take action. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. I think, I mean, speaking for myself, first of all, Julian, I mean, I total agreement with you, because obviously two of those things are very, very close to my heart, with the Hillsborough and Grenfell, because one of my relatives actually went when Grenfell fire happened, and when they took the people that survived to different places, there was no organisation at all. And she was probably a girl in her 30s. She's half Asian, and she's not the bright, you know, she's not sort of a great education on how to organise or anything. But what she is a very warm-hearted and caring person. And basically, the community did most of the organisation early on for Grenfell, and it's just incredible that, you know, that communities do come together, and that quite a lot went on that, you know, otherwise. And I mean, I know other people, I know one person that had a flat there, and she said when it came to rehousing, and that took a long time because obviously they were stuck in a hotel, and she said, there's just one thing I ask, is please make sure it's got a fire safety certificate, whatever you offer me. And what did they do? They finally offered her somewhere that didn't. And it's just a total lack of, you know, uncaring and all that kind of thing. Now, at that point, I will shut up, because otherwise, because there's lots of people here, I think, that would like to get in and ask questions and things. So if I can just ask people to do the little hand figure thing, if you can, because I can't quite see everybody, I don't think. So who would like to ask the first question? Otherwise, I'll rabbit on all night.
All right.
Well, come on,
There you
John.
go.
Sorry, I couldn't see you there, John. Carry on, John. You keep moving.
Me?
Yeah, you.
Sue's the first one in the line.
I can't see all
And
of
then
Sue's
Steve.
screen.
Yeah. And
Okay, apologies. Whoever's top, you two. Ladies first, Sue.
Why not? Yeah. I mean, I was just going to say that how appropriate it is to have you speak, Julian, because Bill is here. He's not going to speak. He's our Trades Council secretary. He's just had a major operation. But I mean, he has been part of the leading light about putting on some films about Orgreave and Wapping. I mean, John and Steve as well. But I mean, I think what you said, Val, was very appropriate. And it was absolutely clear at the time that there was no organisation around Grenfell.
Mm.
And I remember, you know, the criticism of Theresa May for not going down there. And there was Jeremy with all those poor firefighters who looked absolutely exhausted. Right. I think it's Steve next, isn't it?
Right, Steve next then.
Is it right? Yeah, to be a bit more topical, really, at the moment about Gaza and about what happened the other Wednesday in Parliament, where we saw a contested decision by the Speaker, and his response was to basically scapegoat a large proportion of society by saying it was MPs were threatened. Basically, he didn't say it in so many terms, but the right-wing press have said that by Muslims. They have scapegoated the Muslim society by members of that community for the basically large-scale demonstrations against what's going on in Gaza. Now, to say that these people are they are the people and they are threatening MPs. Basically, if you look at the lies that have come out on the mainstream media about MPs' offices being attacked, there's absolutely no truth to it at all. And a lot of the people that are actually on those demonstrations aren't Muslims anyway. They're Jewish, they're atheists, they're Christians, they're white, they're black. But it's been done to scapegoat a proportion of society. That's what I see going on, and that's what I see that is actually now that gaslighting is going on to scapegoat those people. I don't know how you feel about whether you see it as that or what.
Well, there's a lot of gaslighting about, and there's a wide variety of people who go on those marches. I just think I did watch most of that in Parliament, and I can understand why it happened, but it didn't do Parliament any favours whatsoever, because, you know, we've got to realise as political activists, which I think we all are on this call, that most people aren't really interested in politics, and they'll probably give it 4 or 5 minutes thought a week. Can you imagine that? How much more relaxing our lives would be if we had that? But obviously we spent thinking about it. But it did not, whatever your views on that situation, it didn't do Parliament any favours at all. Going back to what Sue and Val said, you know, yes, there was no or very little support for the victims of Grenfell, and that is partly due to austerity, because all the support's been hollowed out over the many years. But it is I think it is a culture of indifference. It can't be anything else than that, because we've seen too many examples of it, which I've spoken about already, and they seem more interested in if there are any illegal immigrants living in the tower than anything else, to be honest. Almost, not quite saying this, but almost that it was their fault, you could say. I think they went back from that, but it's absolutely shameful. And look, there's no doubt. I've spoken to one of the firefighters that was investigating Grenfell, and there's no doubt that the firefighters made mistakes on the night. But think about what they faced. They've never faced anything like that before. It was inevitable they were going to make mistakes, and they were dealing with a building that was not safe to live in. It wasn't just the cladding on the outside, it was the smoke vents, there's failures in the fire doors, there's all sorts of things going on. And I know I felt quite upset about how the firefighters were scapegoated in the first stage of the inquiry. And I'm really not confident, because there's so many, the Arconic and the other companies involved. There's so many different companies involved. I'm sure it'll just be a merry-go-round of blaming each other and finger pointing. So I'm not sure if we'll ever get to the bottom of it. But I wouldn't, and I'm not naive, so I don't think this will happen. But there are politicians who are at the root causes of why this happened, because they allowed these regulations to be weakened so severely, because that emboldens these companies. If you think you're going to get away with something and you haven't really got any morals, you will get away with whatever you can. And I'm sure that the PR people in these companies will, I think they almost believe their own hype. Because I'm a health and safety rep. I've been a health and safety rep for a number of years now. No manager ever tells me that safety isn't their top priority. It's patently obvious that safety isn't the priority. It's the pursuit of profit, or it's saving money. I could go on for a long time about that. I'll stop immediately. Thank you. I'm not sure who's next.
John.
Yeah, hello, Julian. Thank you very much for that. It's the Wapping dispute that you touched on earlier. I think Sue mentioned it, and I was a witness to that. And there were regular press briefings by a police officer during that dispute, who ended up going to prison. And nothing seems to have ever been said about that, or, you know, not even a sniff of the corruption and that, you know. And I just made a few notes. Yeah, Eddie Shah, there's a name. If some people remember. Yes. But it started with a dispute in the Nottingham Evening Post. And the man that was advising the management of the Nottingham Evening Post was a man called Christopher Carew. And he went on to advise Murdoch. And, you know, it just goes to show you they're all tied up together, aren't they? And I don't know how we can stop this. Maybe we should get a human rights lawyer in charge that would help. But, you know, it's looking around for the right one that counts, doesn't it? You know.
Well,
anyway, another name from the past, which is probably well before you were born, Lord Denning. Everyone remember Lord Denning? How they used to wheel him out, you know, to take anyone that was picked up by the old bill in a dispute. So there's lots of stuff there from the past. It's such a shame.
No, there's a lot more, and I've also met the Shrewsbury, some of the Shrewsbury Terry Renshaw, the Shrewsbury 24 pickets, and you know they've been vindicated. Their convictions have been thrown out, thankfully. But there's a long history, and this is why trade unionism is so vital. You know, I see trade unionism as, you know, a benefit for the country. We're not the enemy within that some would like us to portray. Yes, so I know Starmer was one of the QC. Was he a QC at the time when he defended the Wapping members? And actually, Starmer also defended the McLibel 2, if anyone's watched that film. And one thing that Starmer and Corbyn do have in common is they appeared in that McLibel film. They were the only two politicians to do so. Not sure how they'd feel about that today, but there you go. So thanks, yeah, thanks very much for that, and your words about Wapping. Very important dispute, but another bitter failure in the history of trade unionism, unfortunately.
Mark, over to you. Oh, we can't hear you. Unmute.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, we can hear you now.
Great. I would suggest there are some things that we could do which would make a difference. We could change our political system so we got away from this adversarial type of system that we have, so there is more cooperation between all the parties. I would like to also suggest that the various regulators for Ofwat and Ofgem and all of that lot, the chairman should always be independent of the industry, because so many of these people on the regulators and the regulator boards come from the industry themselves or go back into the industry. And I think that if we could get greater independence there, it would make a huge difference. And those are really the two things that I think might actually alter the culture in this country and might help us to be fair to all.
Thanks, Mark. I absolutely 100% agree with you about the need to reduce this adversarial politics. I'm a big, let's not get into this debate now, but I'm a big proponent of PR, a fairer voting system. That is not the answer, but it's the first step on the way, I believe. Because we do need to, I work with my opposition, my Tory MP and my constituency pretty well when we can. We disagree on virtually everything, but when we can work together, we do so reasonably effective. And you're right about, I mean, there's so many ways we need to improve our democracy, but you're absolutely right. I mean, I touched on it in my talk, but it is absolutely a revolving door. They go from the industry to the regulator, back to the industry, old boys club in the main, I'm sad to say. And, you know, there's no, I've got no, especially Ofgem, who I've dealt with and read their website from start to finish, it seems. I've got no confidence that they are in any way the energy consumers champion. So yes, I'm in definite agreement with you on that. So thanks very much. And I would like to say before I forget, thanks very much for putting up with me today, because it was the first time I'd spoken on this. So apologies if it was a bit reedy, but I will get better with time, I'm sure. But thank you for being my guinea pigs for this speech anyway. Thanks a lot. Sue, I think you were next.
Well, I think it was an excellent speech, and I thought it was very fluent as well. The only trouble is that there are so many things that I want to say about it.
Well, I'm happy to.
There was an interesting, we heard Laurie Leyburn and Matthew Lawrence at the weekend talking about climate change, and they had this formula which was 1, 7, 14. So it was for every one, what would it have been? There would be 14, for every one action on climate change, there would be 7 actions which were against, and 14 would be going to the shareholders. That was the corporate ratio. What I was going to say is that there are so many of these situations. I think there is actually a study, an academic study of agnotology, which is about inducing amnesia in people. And that is what we have with our media. And it is really something which everybody should be campaigning about, the fact that Murdoch owns so much of the media. But in addition, what was the media? What was I going to say? I've got so many things to say, I can't remember. But basically, I know what I was going to say. It's all down to Osborne and Cameron and the coalition government. The first things they did, I mean, they obviously had a great stack of plans to put out. So the amount of legislation that they withdrew, which protected workers in terms of, you know, needing to pay what was it, their line was that you needed to charge people to challenge the employer, because otherwise there would be a lot of spurious claims. So that was one of the first bits. But of course, removal of legal aid and of the capacity to have inquiries about anything. So I mean, really, that's what the left should be doing, is we need to have a similar plan of action that we could take when in power in order to undo that sort of legislation. Because the fear is, I think justifiably, is that it's all just going to remain the same and there's going to be some more tinkering around the edges. Whereas what we really need is some positive action to protect the people you're talking about. I mean, you know, I mean, I love this idea of guilty knowledge. I mean, it's wonderful, but we need to have specific legislation to protect people like the Windrush folk, the Grenfell. I mean, Grenfell, we've still got buildings that are covered with that cladding, haven't we? Anyway, so the question was really, is we need to get perhaps the unions to draw up some sort of campaign about the legislation that needs to be withdrawn. What do you think?
I know that the new working deal has largely been written by people from the union movement, that's my understanding. But we can't beat around the bush. I think the UK, I think we always think of, and I suffer from it as well, from exceptionalism. I think the UK suffers from very severe corruption.
Yes.
And we always think of it as other countries. I don't know, name a country, Mexico, Italy. It happens everywhere. It doesn't happen here. We've got severe corruption in this country and we need to wake up to it. You won't hear about it in most of the media. And even the issues as brought up in the Hillsborough, during the Hillsborough inquests, about the influence of Freemasonry. I don't know what the influence is because it's a secret society, but it definitely has had some influences on some of the scandals that we've heard about. And we can't have, you know, secret societies like that. But I know you were hinting at it about, you know, the Tories wanted to curb judicial review, which is a fairly basic right and one of the few steps that we can take to challenge the government, and also industrial tribunals, which I know they introduced payments for them and then they've withdrawn them. There's an interesting judgment on that, which is quite amusing to read and quite scathing of the government at the time. I think it was 2015, 2016. But yeah, we need to do a lot more. I think unions have a large role to play in that. But whether we'll be given that role, I'm not quite sure, because unions, there's still people, you talk about unions and people talk about the 1970s and British Leyland and stuff like that. Although I think now, I've been on picket lines, not my own so much, because we actually don't go on strike on Underground that much, but I've been on a lot of picket lines on National Rail over the last few years. And the latest picket lines I've been on over the last year, we are getting a lot of public support. We never used to get that. We used to get a lot of abuse, if I'm being quite frank. And we'll get one element of abuse and the rest is support and good on you. So I think things are changing, but I think we're going to have a general election where everything is going to be extremely dirty election. Everything's going to be polarized. They're going to throw in these false issues and wokeness and all that sort of rubbish. because they've got no, they can't go on the platform of what they've achieved, because what they've achieved is absolutely. I'm very proud to be British, you know, but I'm just ashamed of what this government have done to this country and our standing in the world. We're just a laughing stock. And at a time when we need to be working with other countries, let's not get into Brexit, but when we need to be working with other countries, you know, our standing is absolutely appalling, and that needs to change. So whether, you know, perfect or not, we definitely need a change of government. Absolutely. And hopefully we can get, when we're in, we can get some of the changes that we need. And we'll never get everything that we want. No one ever does. But let's keep pushing for it, and let's keep pressing, and let's see where we can go. Because we owe it to all the victims and all the families and all the pain that they've suffered to make the effort. Because sometimes I think a lot of people actually think it's too overwhelming. There's too much wrong with the world. I can't fix anything. I'm just one person. We can change things. You know, things don't change. They don't change in, you know, places with 5,000 people in. They start off with conversations between 1 or 2 people in dingy rooms, and then they spread, and ideas form, and you can change things one step at a time. And if we all join together, like in a trade union, that's also a good idea as well.
Can I say that is one of the really positive things about you coming to speak, because it is overwhelming, because you can't think of a single thing which is better. And I'm sorry, Matt, someone wanted to speak before me, but that was what I was going to say. I also wanted to say there's an elephant in the room here about the victims of COVID and what happened there, and the way that the hospital staff was treated. I mean, it's just swept under the carpet completely. The non-provision of PPE was the very least that we could have expected. And then we have Michelle Moan and the like. Sorry, I think Mark wanted to speak, didn't you? Mark?
Yes, I just wanted to, I remember something else I wanted to say, and I forgot when I was speaking before, was that I would love the Labour Party to commit to getting trade union members on the board of companies, because I think that would alter the culture considerably, and also to really look at how we fund political parties so that influence cannot be bought by big business. And I have to say, I'm actually not a member of the Labour Party, mainly because I'm concerned about the way historically the Labour Party has been funded by the influence of trade unions as a bloc. I'm very happy for members of trade unions to contribute to the Labour Party, and even for the trade union movement to collect their membership fees. But I would just like to see a greater independence of powerful bodies influencing our politicians.
No, fair point. I think trade union money is a lot cleaner than a lot of other money that we don't know where it comes from.
No, I agree to that. But
yeah, no, I do take your point. What was the other thing you mentioned? Because I did agree with that as well, but it slipped. We're both going to forget.
Trade union members on boards of companies, I wanted. Yes,
and they did talk about having membership on the boards, maybe not trade union members, but I think it was like an employee. But then that was quietly dropped, I think. And going back to the long COVID, I don't know whether you've all watched Breathtaking. I found it. I've watched a lot of programs. I probably found it one of the most difficult watches ever. I almost couldn't bear watching it. And I can watch most things, because for a start, it annoyed me incredibly. I was just very, very, very angry. And I just found it incredibly upsetting and I remember at the start, I dealt with, in a very small way, I dealt with making sure that the underground was safe for our members and for the public, for it to be safe as it could be for the public as well. And we were very close to actually throwing the towel in and saying we're not running a service because we don't believe you can keep it safe for us. It was very close, and the drivers almost had enough. But I do remember, and we wanted PPE for the drivers and the station staff, and the fight. I recognised the fight that the doctors and the nurses had in a far more severe way and a more dangerous environment, that we couldn't get the PPE, and it was all about Public Health England say this, and we knew they were behind the curve. But what they did, what the nurses and the doctors did, and the cleaners in the hospital, was absolutely incredible. And it's shameful, absolutely shameful how they were treated. And I wrote a blog about it's time to stop clapping for the carers, because I thought it's completely disingenuous. It was disgraceful what they were doing, and it had to stop. But yes, that is another issue. But yeah, long COVID is just, at the moment, it's just being swept under the carpet, and it's not right.
If nobody else has got anything to say, I can add to that, in that one of the things that the government and the WHO was saying was that it wasn't an airborne infection. It was that it was all by touch, and washing hands made a difference. As a biologist, a parasitologist, that's the last thing. It was obvious that it was airborne, but the WHO had some experiments in the 1920s that said that flu was, what do they call it, fomites. So it was a spread by touch, and they've stuck with it. Well, the reason they've stuck with it is quite clearly because corporations, bosses, etc., do not want to introduce the sort of air conditioning or the ventilation of buildings that would have, well, not just knocked out COVID, but would have helped with flu and colds and all the rest of it. So that's another example.
Thank you. I was just looking, so I was looking away, but I was just looking up because I've got a COVID file on my computer.
Have you?
It's got loads of different websites, but I know they downgraded COVID very early on,
Yes.
so they wouldn't require the same level of PPE. And
it completely shocking, and with people who weren't epidemiologists as well. On the whole, they were mathematical modelers, or yes, there weren't even a virologist on the panel most of the time, but that's sort of a particular bugbear of mine. But what happened to the people who died of COVID and the people who were working in those hospitals, it's just, I mean, it's the hugest scandal. Well, all of them are the hugest scandal. Anyway.
And the arguments that I had about ventilation, I just went on and on and on.
And keeping the kids in school when the kids are always known to be an absolute sewer of viruses.
Oh God, yeah.
Yeah. Mm.
That's absolutely. It's shocking.
Anybody else? I can't see the top. I seem to have you two are on the top of mine, Steve and Sue. That's why I can't see if you were wanting to say anything.
I could go on forever, but I won't.
Okay.
I can't see anyone.
All right.
Oh, that's good. Yes, I must have to rethink my strategy for these Zoom meetings.
I think we must have covered just about everything, haven't we? You know, we'd have to start digging into history with some of the stuff.
Well, I think you could advertise the Whopping film, John.
Well, I could, yes. The Whopping film. It's going to be on the 24th of March. And we're actually going to have one of the victims of Murdoch there. And, you know, myself, who was a witness to it, because obviously I worked in the printing trade, and along with a lot of other people, we went up there to support our fellow members that had been done away with, as it were. And of course, it was the same old thing. You know, we've been talking about this tonight. and it, you know, the lies that was told about that. You know, I even saw a news item where apparently the demonstrators and strikers had ripped these railings down, you know, and they all look like spears, don't they? And they were throwing them at the police. And I had to mention it to my dad. I said, well, I walked past those railings at 2 o'clock in the morning when there was hardly anybody there, and they were still up. But that came as a news item on the Sunday evening. So I suppose that comes under gaslighting or similar, and that sort of thing. But, you know, right almost from the beginning of Thatcher with these so-called enemy within, you know, that was all part of it, and it hasn't stopped. It's just carried on and carried on, got worse. The latest example of it is how terrible the MPs are being treated by all these terrible people that are marching through London. And of course, I've been on one of those marches, and I never saw anything that could even get anywhere near verbal violence, because I think that's what it is. But, you know, they like to make a lot of it, and Lindsay Hoyle has staked his reputation on it, which is not very high now. Anyway, there you go.
There's a lot of lies about from Thatcher onwards.
Oh yeah, she really got going.
Just getting back to the changes since the 80s. We do have YouTube. We do have more things like Navara Media. There was a lot of alternatives out there which wasn't there in the 80s. And the business with the police, my understanding at the time was that the police was styled on colonial police. That's where their policing came from. That's why certain people, like football supporters who are seen as scum, trade unionists who were seen as scum, those were the people that were deliberately picked on. But what really did Thatcher in the end, the story I heard, was the poll tax riots. What happened with the police? They actually then started thumping anybody. And there were a lot of people who went there who weren't used to it. They weren't trade unionists. They weren't used to being pushed around at football matches. They went there. They came back from they're coming back from the theatre and suddenly get a truncheon across the back of their heads. That suddenly changed. It wasn't just the usual suspects that were getting thumped. It was a lot of other people, and that opened people's eyes to how the police. Most people thought they were going to bump into Jack Warner or something, but you know, that's their view of the policing from the 1950s. But that wasn't what was happening in the 80s, and I think a lot of eyes were opened at the end of the 80s when they saw what was happening with the poll tax riots.
I think with the sub postmasters, they'll see them as, you know, the salt of the earth people down the bottom of their road, and I think that's why it's taken its time, because this scandal's been brewing for a long time. But I think, you know, finally, and it's a shame that it took an ITV drama to actually sort of highlight it. But I'm glad it's done it finally. But yes.
Can I just say about the thing that you touched on about the contaminated blood? I mean, that at least the postmasters are continuing. The people who have been affected by the contaminated blood are dying.
Yeah.
Every 4 days, one of those people dies.
Yeah.
And that is the real cynicism of the government, just to play along like they did about the people who were suffering from the nuclear tests.
Yep.
The Japanese prisoners of war, they kept it on, and at the end, hoping that everybody would just die off, which is real cynicism.
No, absolutely. It's happened to the Windrush generation and the Shrewsbury 24. A number of those died before they got the sort of justice that they received. So the fight goes on. There's no end to it at all.
I think that's right. Julian, it's been it's been absolutely marvellous to listen to you and have you along tonight. And I think you'll find we're all in agreement with you. And I think it sometimes helps when we get somebody else in and we talk about things. And, you know, I think you've got such a positive outlook as well that we can all change things. And I wish you every success if something really good happens to you a little bit later on in the month or next month or whatever, and we're all rooting for you here.
Thank you.
So thank you very much indeed.
Can I just check who it was that you wanted us to write to?
Whoever your
MPs,
whoever your MP is.
But because we want independence of these Ofcom, Ofgem and so on.
That was actually wasn't my idea.
Compensation.
Someone else had that brilliant idea. I can't claim that, but it was all because they should be independent from the industry.
Yes, out of the hands of government. And
yes, someone will tell
Is there a specimen, a pro forma so we can get hold of?
I haven't got one. It was only I texted Lee Castleton and I said, I'm doing a little speech, and he said, what's the main take that you'd like me to get over from you? And that's what he said. What I'll do is I'll email.
Please
do exactly what he said, and then you can take it from there.
Yeah.
But I do think if you add that one in about the
contaminated blood.
No, the independence of.
Oh yeah.
And then add in about taking away the, or definitely the post office involvement and government involvement from the compensation schemes.
Oh, if it was from the compensation scheme,
Yeah.
was what I wanted to.
the trouble is they've been talking about it as compensation, but they've got to pay them back what they've already paid, and then there should be compensation on top.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I can't believe this, and how people are so accepting of stuff. And well, they're not obviously, but other people are. It's just ridiculous.
There was a bit of gossip about Paula Venables. Is it Venables? Is that her? Yeah. But she was brought in by the Archbishop of Canterbury to rejig the churches, and her view was that they had to shut down all these churches. And now
It's a common theme.
Yeah, but they're now having a tremendous problem because all these congregations have been split up and they haven't got the money. And so, I mean, the woman was an absolute menace, wasn't she? Anyway.
Where did the money go to? That's the point.
Thank you, Julian. You've been absolutely wonderful.
No, thank you. Thank you very much. Very nice crowd. But I tell you, train drivers can be a tough crowd. So you were lovely.
Oh, well, we are. We do try, but we're not always lovely if we're if we're in other meetings with awkward issues to deal with.
Well, you're allowed to be the awkward squad at times as well.
Oh, thank you.
Sometimes it's called for. What I'll do is I'll send you some details of my blogs which cover some of the issues we talked about today.
Please,
and send those details. And great to see you all, and good luck and with your future endeavours.